Hello. Hi. How are you? Welcome to Unitary Designation. Today I wanted to talk about the most popular story arc, of arguably the most popular um, anime TV series in the world. I speak of Naruto. Naruto is a story and a franchise that has been one of many people's main entry into anime. And the story is often lauded for being so good and so sort of appealing that it passes the format barrier. So that if you're not into anime historically, you'd still be able to find your way into series like Naruto. And similar series that has served this role has been the anime series Death Note too, and to a lesser extent things like Attack on Titan and Bleach. Like, if you're not interested in anime and the more cringy levels of fandom that or everything associated with it that comes with it, you could still watch those for the story and be gripped, emotionally invested. So it's very akin to Western storytelling. It hits on themes that are, in a Jungian sense, archetypal, and in a Joseph Campbellian sense, a hero's journey archetypal. Like, they're very deep. And one of the things that have caught my intellectual attention with this, essentially kids TV show, although it grew into more of like a teenager, young adult kind of coming of age tale, is that it's a very deep show because it deals with Japanese mythology. And Japanese mythology is something the West has not been as exposed to historically as they have to Greek and Roman and Norse and, Germanic mythology. Like, thanks to Tolkien, we all know of hobbits and dwarves and orcs, but we don't really know about demon foxes and the whole mythological landscape of Japan. And this is speculation on my part, but due to the rapid westernization of Japan, or should we say industrialization of Japan post World War II, it's become a very modernized country, and a lot of the historical mythological underpinnings hasn't had time to shape their culture in the same way it would have if they invented the Industrial Revolution independently, right? They haven't had time to like integrate it. And so Naruto is it's a modern sort of westernized telling of Japanese mythology. So it taps into what are mythologies? They're sort of genetic memories, genetic blueprints of archetypes. And it taps into a reservoir of those that we haven't tapped into yet in the West. And Naruto does this well. Like, it manages to frame Japanese mythology through a lens that Western audiences can relate to. Right. So I've been fascinated by this show. I enjoy it quite a lot, but I've also been fascinated by its mass appeal. Because anything that manages to capture broad scale attention is doing something right. Like the same principle that applies to democracy, that there's something divine inside every individual, and that if we aggregate individual, the wisdom of everyone sort of guides us together. There's something about that when it comes to pop culture too. People tend to gravitate to something that has accumulated word of mouth and a lot of eyeballs. So I'm fascinated by Naruto's ability to attract such a large audience, despite its limitations of the anime and the manga format. It's originally based on a manga. So the most popular arc in the Naruto story is the Pain Arc. I think it's a long shot. I think it's the most popular arc of the story. I've seen polls done on fan pages that demarcates the Pain Arc as the best arc. and people's favorites. So I took some interest to why is it the Pain Assault arc. It happens sort of in the middle of the show, essentially towards the latter end of the timeline of the show, but in the middle of like the published, yeah. If the publication of Naruto went from 2002 to like 2014, it happened in like 2008. It was in the middle of the popularity of it, I would say. And it also took it to a new level. So I've been very interested in it. So the Pain Assault arc is a story arc that starts with there's too much backstory to go into, and it's not really relevant. What's relevant is that the sins of the forefathers have come back to haunt, like the village, the village state that the Naruto series is essentially about. The village hidden in the leaves, the Konohagakure, is finally undone by its internal contradictions, right? So the sins of the forefathers, the war crimes, the exploitation of smaller nation states that we haven't been informed about, seeing as we've seen this show through the eyes of the protagonist, Uzumaki Naruto. So this is you, as the hero archetype, has to defend what has been filled with internal shadow and contradiction. Like, you still have to come to the aid of your village, even when the legitimate sins of the past comes knocking. And Pain's assault end up being very costly to Naruto. It kills his father figure, his grandfather figure, his mentor. So he can easily go towards revenge, and we will get into why that's a theme that applies. I think the root of the popularity of this story arc is that it pits, like I said earlier, that Naruto is a show about Japanese mythology, and this arc sort of pinpoints that, because it's essentially the Pain Assault force is essentially Buddhism, mythologically speaking. We'll get into why that is later. And Naruto's choice to not go with vengeance, but stand up heroically and forgive, is sort of like the Christian archetype that we see. Naruto plays the role of a savior figure a lot of times too, and it's not exclusive to Christianity. There's a lot of myths that have a savior figure, but it's essentially a Christian theme versus a Buddhist theme. So I think that's why it's so appealing. So we'll get into that. So the invasion starts. The arc starts with Pain's invasion, Naruto fighting Pain, the decisive talk, and then Naruto, hero of Konoha. So this arc has a lot of different connotations to it. The main antagonist is called Pain, and he has these eyes, these purple eyes that are called the Rinnegan, and they're basically samsara eyes. Like, that's a Buddhist term, samsara eyes, and it stands for it has to do with the cycle of death and rebirth that we see in Buddhism. The Rinnegan. In Naruto, the ocular jutsu, like the eye-centered techniques, the Sharingan, the Byakugan, the Rinnegan, they're very popular, and they're sort of like the most. I would say the most popular characters have these ocular jutsus. Naruto do not, and the Rinnegan is sort of this legendary eye that only the sage of six paths, only the founder of all ninja ever had. And so they're not supposed to exist. They're sort of like Adam and Eve, like they're that kind of thing. So if someone showed up with the apple of Eden, you'd be like, that can happen, right? And so this guy shows up, this Pain character, shows up with these eyes. and it's like mythology itself has come knocking on your door. You're living in this sort of modernized sort of, they don't even believe in the Sage of Six Paths. He's a myth. He's a figure of legends, right? And the thing that's so devastating about the character of Nagato and the character of Pain that he is portraying is that he's real. He's very real, and he's coming to like destroy the village that has caused him and his world so much pain. So we're gonna watch a YouTube video that summarizes. It's a dramatization. It's a scene from the show where Pain unleashes the wrath of the sins of the forefathers, and it's set to an orchestral score. So it's going to be, it's going to be a sort of dramatized version, because the orchestral score is present in the anime, but this is a live recording. I like this live recording because it's so dramatized in the right way. It sort of captures that feeling that people get, so that when you talk about Naruto and when you talk about the most popular arc and when you talk about the most popular moment, this is it. So it's a 3-minute video. I'm gonna play it and be muted, and then afterwards I'll talk about why it sort of captures all the dramatic tension of that sort of heroes, everything I've talked about up until now, and then I'll extrapolate later. So that's the scene. Naruto has been away training with frogs, interestingly enough, and the frog motif is actually quite interesting. You saw the dust cloud from so many things to pick up. First of all, the technique he used was called Shinra Tensei. He said that as he destroyed the village. As he flew up into the heavens, and he was like, Shinra Tensei! and it means it's translated as heavenly push or almighty push, but I've looked into the language roots of the and it's both Shinra and Tensei means something akin to nature, innate disposition. So it would be something like path of that which is, or path of nature, or the way of nature. So it's essentially he's directing karmic energies. Essentially, that's the underlying mythology. And the Buddhist influence on this is quite interesting. Before we get into Naruto, let's cover pain. So the 6 paths technique of pain that he uses, of which the Deva path is the one that did the Shinra Tensei, correlates to the Buddhist interpolation of the 6 paths, which are we're into Buddhist metaphysics now. The show, the Naruto show, is a Japanese show about mythology, so it's not subtle. It's not supposed to be like hidden. It's very clearly the samsara eyes, so samsara refers to the wheel of endless cycle of death and rebirth. It's sometimes called the wheel of suffering, and these eyes sort of direct that level of path. The 6 paths, we don't have to go into them, but they are levels of incarnation that people can attain. So technically, you're in the world of human beings right now, and then if you live a really, really, really good life, you end up in the world of gods or celestial beings. And according to Buddhist mythology, you can stay there for thousands of years, millennia. But essentially, you use up all your karma, all your good deeds, and you end up in one of the lower realms. And if you live a really shitty life, accumulate bad karma, you have to burn up that karma in one of the lower realms. And essentially, that's Buddhist mythology. Like, you do your best to exist as well as you can, and then if you exist really well, you go to these higher realms, but if you exist very poorly, you go to these lower realms. And that would sort of account for the spectra of human competency that we see. Like, people who are born human have done enough good things to be human, but that doesn't mean that they're competent to be humans, essentially. So this is their metaphysics. The problem with that is that there's no end to existence. Existence just keeps on going. There's no final end, death. You just get a better rebirth or a poorer rebirth. You don't ever stop. And nirvana, or moksha in Hindu philosophy, is the letting go of the attachment to this samsara, to this wheel of death and rebirth. And so the pain arc is essentially, he has 6 versions of himself, 6 pains, that all band together to destroy Konoha. And then Naruto essentially destroys one by one, so he destroys these paths. Essentially, that would be the Buddhist motif. So Naruto is this kind of optimistic, naive, young, blue-eyed, sort of optimistic kind of individual. He's essentially a kind of he has this will of the village, this will of fire incarnated within him. He sort of exemplifies that. He's also a hero and a chosen prophecy child, so it all comes back to this sort of chosen individual, right? This motif of the prophecy and the hero. But he's training with frogs for this arc, which I found very interesting mythologically, because there's a lot of good, like, he's learning to use this energy called sage energy. That's why he had the eyes, and that's why he arrived with frogs, right? And frogs are very interesting mythologically, because frogs are between categories. Frogs are both on land and on water. They're amphibians, and they're also mammals. Land animals, and they're sort of these harbingers of change and instability. And the Egyptians had this sort of this frog god that was associated with with childbirth and fertility. But frogs have also there's the god Kek, who's the god of chaos. He's also a frog. But there's frogs in other kinds of mythologies too, and I haven't done as much research into this as I could. You could make it your own whole video about the relationship of toad imagery and like mythological thinking. They're often a sign of good rainfall, fertile crops, etc. So they're often associated with fertility. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting overlays there. I haven't, So anyways, Naruto is out training with these frogs, and he attains this sage mode, right? And you don't have to go far looking for the meaning of a sage. A sage is someone who embodies wisdom and sort of heroism that sort of can come to your aid. So Konoha is here. This is in the village of Konoha. They're trying to figure out the identity of Pain and how he's able to use these 6 paths to sort of wreak his vengeance. And this is right before the video I showed you. They're at the doorsteps. They're coming. The pain of the forefathers has happened. And he keeps talking about this world is pain. This life is pain, and pain and suffering is very central to Buddhism and to Christianity, but very central to Buddhism. The reason why you would ever want to escape this samsaric wheel, this wheel of the cycle of death and rebirth, is suffering. It's life sucks, and it doesn't end at death. So the goal of the Buddhist metaphysic is to escape that. Okay, so now we get into there's a lot of other overlaying themes here. Pain has recently slain his former mentor and Naruto's former mentor, this great legendary character called Jiraiya, who was prophesied to by a toad. Incidentally, he was prophesied by the great toad elder that he would find and direct the child of prophecy, and he's trained both of these two. So it's essentially in this universe of the story, it's a question of what path should the world take. Pain wants to dominate the world through fear, and Naruto is hoping that everyone can come together and sort of unify over love. And there's no direct sort of implication as to why one would be superior to the other. So they have this, Naruto destroys Pain after a lengthy combat, and then we don't have to walk through it. It's the anime does fights pretty well, but he essentially ends him, locates the receiver, asks very specifically to go alone, right? Note the symbolism. The village is destroyed. Naruto has defeated the enemy. He's on his way to do judgment on the individual who had destroyed his legacy and killed hundreds. Like, at this point in the manga, many are dead, including people very close to the central story. So this is there's too much to go into, but it's essentially his motivations doesn't necessarily matter in the particulars. The interesting thing is he's not going there for vengeance. He says here, I won, I lost. That's not really what matters. He has to go see for himself, right? And they won't let him. So, like, obviously, there's an enemy at the doorsteps. You have to protect. You have to destroy the invader, right? And then Naruto says, like, he killed my master and messed up the village and everyone. Of course, I don't forgive him. So this character here is a very wise and sort of like tactical genius. So he's like the military mind. And even he sees that there's something that has possessed Naruto that goes beyond military and above strategy. And so when he lets him go, that's a sort of symbol of faith in Naruto. And he's been this sort of like incarnate hero, if you will. This relentless, never give up optimism. And so when he lets him go, that's very telling. So, yeah. When I'm with Naruto, he wants me want to talk to him at his side. He has this strange power to inspire you. Sometimes, yeah, he's hope in a way, incarnate, or he has something that pulls humanity towards a common goal, like the sort of cosmic attractor, like the sort of authentic existence that we're all trying to arrive at. He's just shining that forward. Like Nelson Mandela talked about, when you let your light shine, you unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. Naruto is kind of this embodiment of that. He can't not shine. That's his mode. He's too dumb to realize he's supposed to not, in a way. He's very dense. So, anyways. So he arrives at this sort of legendary showdown, and he's angry. He's pissed. Like, I was pissed watching this, reading this. I did not want them to have a peaceful conversation. Okay, I wanted Naruto to kick his ass. And that's, in a sort of way, exactly what Pain wants. He wants this sort of violent confrontation, which would beget more hatred. It would prove his philosophical standpoint. It would prove that she says it here, killing Nagato and achieving vengeance isn't going to save or change the world. And given that there's a prophecy that these two will direct the world, that this seems important. This is important. A vicious cycle of hatred will be set in motion. That cycle is what has led Pain to do the things he has done here. So, oh yeah, and also, just on an unrelated note, Naruto has a vision of his father in this sort of time of turmoil, when he's about to lose himself to hate, essentially. And, it's just rich with symbolism. I don't have time in this video to go into everything, but it's so layered. Like, the father of the wisdom of the past, directing us away from vengeance, from short-sightedness, the sins of the forefathers, the death of the mentor figure, the heroic individual accepting adulthood, coming to stand on his own. There's so many themes, and it's packed into these 5 sort of chapters. It's very dense. So there's the option here. You can sacrifice yourself to me and the peace that I will construct. And Pain has this power. Like, these Samsara Wheel Eyes, they're powerful beyond belief. Like, they end up being the end power of the series. Like, they're really strong. We're told how strong they are, but it becomes apparent how just breaking they are of any power dynamic. So, a long story short, and a long talk. Like, even Naruto, this sort of like Jesus figure incarnate, this sort of like not perfect individual, but this sort of loving, forgiving, sort of optimistic, happy-go-lucky character, can't forgive him. And he has darkness in himself that he hasn't wrestled with, right? The Jungian shadow. These red eyes is the Nine Tails, the demon fox spirit that has been sealed inside Naruto coming out. So it's like, but something, god damn it, something stops him, right? Something comes to him. Even though the people that we have lost are gone, their wisdom is sort of still with us. And this arc could have easily ended with Naruto defeating this guy in out-and-out combat. And it wouldn't have been the same. It would have been more dopamine, sort of, it would have been cooler in a way to see him like go all out and win. But it's also not what made this arc the most popular. There were great fights, but it comes down to a philosophical and even a theological level in this dialogue. And it's not my favorite arc. That was the creation of Konoha arc that I talked about, the nation state. But this arc is the most popular one, and it's I suspect it's because of this Christianity versus Buddhism, Westernism versus old school Eastern mythology that comes together, and this sort of confrontation here. I'm not saying this resolves this metaphysical conflict. That's going to take a long time of a lot of work for people to resolve and see who wins out there. But this manga, this artwork puts these two figures in confrontation with those two, I think, with those two intellectual backdrops as a motivation. So Naruto asks for a story to try to empathize with him. I want to hear your stories. He wants to know why the pain has done all this. And Nagato is also interested. Like he's never seen anything like this. He wants to hear his response. So we go through the time when Konoha, what would you call them? They're shinobi, but military soldiers. Konoha soldiers destroyed his family, killed his mom and dad, and then he, awoke his eyes, and then also how his country was ripped apart by war and strife. And you don't have to go very deep to figure out that the effect that war, ideological conflicts have had on developing nations, either through colonialism or through the Middle East conflicts, have been detrimental for the long-term stability of those regions. You don't have to look too far to find examples of this happening in real life. And, people who have been over there say that they don't know how to penetrate that hatred. And it's these kind of things that makes these things human universals rather than just artworks in their own rights. So they started a militia that was supposed to bring stability, and they actually meant it, not like this sort of guerrilla warfare, but fighting for stable democratic rule. And then the powers that be in allegiance with the dark side of Konoha is embodied in this character of Hanzo, and he sort of had a hand in destabilizing this nation. Their leader Yahiko dies, and then he sort of unloads the full power of this mythological power he has, this ocular technique. And then then his path is sort of set. He's seen so much suffering that he's convinced that the world is a place of innate suffering, and that trumps the hope and the slow incremental progress that we make through history. And so he's decided to stop a dialectical kind of evolution of the world and end it with essentially the nuclear bomb. Like his whole plan is collecting these vast amounts of power so that he can rule by fear, and it's essentially a metaphor for the nuclear bomb. The explosions even look similar, right? So all these teams, and Japan was hit twice by the nuclear bomb. So it sort of makes this an interesting format to comment on using nuclear power legitimately as a sort of deterrent for escalating warfare, as a sort of limit cap on suffering. Like, you can inflict misery on each other, but not through warfare, only inside the perimeters that I will allow with my nuclear power. And we haven't seen that yet in history, a totalitarian nuclear dictatorship that had global control, but that's essentially what he wants to instill here. And like, how do you respond to that when your village is in ruins and all your comrades are dead? And Naruto just puts out this old book, right? This tome written by his sensei that I truly believe that eventually the day will come when all people will understand one another and live in harmony. So, this sort of, I will call it Western, because if there's one thing that the Enlightenment and thinkers like John Locke and Hume and Francis Bacon, Rene Descartes, if there's one thing that motivated all the thinkers of post-Enlightenment thinking, was that there was progress that could be made and a human ethic that could evolve, and that we could live by each other's side. And I believe that. I believe that to my core. And I think that's the value that can stand up against the suffering-oriented philosophical paradigm of the world. And I think that that's what this manga, this series, this work of art is getting at. Even though Naruto get where he's coming from, he empathizes, he understands. Empathy just is not enough. That's such an important thing. Empathy, the pursuit, like the human instinct to empathize and to like see where you're coming from, is not enough in this case. He has to go to something deeper or something more profound. And he says he's going to believe in these values, these sort of, he calls him pervy sage Jiraiya, but it's just an internal joke they have. He's going to believe in his beliefs. He's going to believe in the values that are higher than instinctive empathy. When just understanding another person, seeing their guts isn't enough, you have these axiomatic theological values, these things that are grounded in something beyond emotional judgments. They're bound in a value system of ethics that goes to the core. And then he anchors his whole hope for the future on that answer. On the answer of, no, we're not going to settle for a world in which suffering is limited by a totalitarian system. We're actually going to keep everyone hoping for the same future, a future where people live together in a way that sustains their being across time, free of hatred, not living together. We're going to choose cooperation on a global scale rather than segregation. And that's where Christianity, in my mind, confronts Buddhism, because Buddhism is all about ending existence. First, in Buddhism, and when it first started with the Buddha, it was about your own liberation, sometimes called Hinayana, or lesser vehicle. And then Buddhism matured and became about, okay, we've achieved our enlightenment, we're going to help set everyone free. We're not leaving before everyone is free, and that's called Mahayana, the great vehicle. But it's still about stopping existence. And Christianity, at least in the West, has been about maintaining a sustainable social order throughout time. Like, death was not the end, but it wasn't eternal either. Like, it wasn't like Nietzsche said that existence was eternal. You got to heaven and that was sort of it. That was an end point. And insofar as Christianity offers a solution that aims at maximizing human well-being here, like maximizing a sustainable state across time, then it's better than everyone sort of trying to bail out of a metaphysics. So that's you could argue many of these points, but I would say that that's my take on what the philosophical and theological conflict that happens in this encounter is about. And so, what does he choose, right? There's no such thing as true peace. Like, the very notion of believing in his his words after all the pain that he's been through? How can you believe in true peace when we live in this cursed world, right? Why not just give up, right? Give up now. Why try, right? It's so much suffering, and we're going to make it worse so that you won't have to try. That's sort of like the nihilistic approach. Suffering is real. It's too real. We're not gonna try to make things better. We're gonna make them actively worse so that you have to stop trying. And then Naruto says, I'll break that curse. If there's such a thing as peace, I'll find it. I'm not giving up. It's his best bet. It's his best strategy. And this stops Nagato in this sort of, it stops him dead in his tracks. And the reason why it stops him dead in his tracks is because they're his words. Those are the ideas that he had as a child that inspired Jiraiya to write the book. And so the vision that led you when you were younger, when you were 15 or 10, that sort of naive optimism about the world, that was the real thing. And what the world has sort of turned us all into are just like these vague shadows of that light. But there's something about that is worth fighting for, and it stops him. He realizes he has forsaken himself. He has tried to instill a totalitarian system that would lessen pain, I suppose. And he's forgotten that the reason why he wanted to do that was because he wanted to make a better world. And he's become misguided. And then, we have this flashback to where he shares that exact idea with Jiraiya. And then he writes this story about this character, the tales of a gutsy ninja who never gives up. This is from the book that Jiraiya wrote. And the main character is called Naruto. And that's why Naruto's dad, Jiraiya's pupil, names his kid that. They want to create this embodiment, or hope to create this embodiment of hope and optimism that won't stop to change this fallen world. And the world has moved from, in my other videos, video about Naruto, I went through this, but the world has gone from era of warring states to like the establishment of the city-state, which is like this Greek dream, the ancient Greeks, Athens dream of democratic rule. And then they're sort of moving past warring city-states to like this sort of era of peace for everyone. And that's Naruto's aim, nothing less than like peace. He says, I will be the leader of the village, Hokage, and I will bring peace to Konoha, to Amagakure, and to Nagato's village, where he's from. He will essentially become president, and he will use that power to bring peace to his village. And then he says, how can you trust in yourself not to change? And that's what we've all done, right? We've all been through pain, and we've sort of given up on our, not really utopian visions, but our optimism. That's what nihilism is. It's just pain bringing us down. And then Naruto, being the kind of character he is, that's why he's such a popular character, I think, is that if the main character were to change, it would be a different story. It would become something other than the book our teacher left behind. And the main character wouldn't be Naruto. I can't write like my master, so any sequel has to come from the life I live, right? And that's deep. That's the Aristotelian good life. That's living a life was a work of art. No matter how much it hurts, I gotta keep walking, because that's who Naruto is. And it's sort of trite in a way, but it's also, it works. Like, it just works. That is the thing that we all wish we could say. And that's why we mock it, because we want to see, is this real? Are you really, you're not going to stop if I do this and this and this? And it's so deep that it's past where we're operating. We're already operating in a system where we assume people have given up on that. And he's like a callback to a genetic memory where we were actually hopeful about the world. And like, how silly isn't that? But what kind of culture can't live if it doesn't hope that things will, a future that's worth living for? And so that's sort of what this is. That's why. So Naruto forgives him here. He does. He believes in these axiomatic values more than his empathy and his vengeance. And so because of that, Nagato says, I think I shall believe in your vision. Like, your vision, the vision of these values, are worth more than my life right now. So what he does is he uses the ghetto art of divine rebirth, and it will kill him. And it's the power of his ocular eyes. And yeah, she realizes this mysterious child has changed Nagato. And so he uses his power, the power of the Buddhism, the reincarnation arc, the reincarnation powers, to essentially reincarnate everyone. And that's the difference. Naruto could have destroyed him and been lost, and lost all his friends, lost his village, essentially, right? And he doesn't do that. He doesn't just destroy the enemy. He forgives the enemy. And because he forgives the enemy and loves him as himself, everyone else is redeemed. They conquer death. You don't have to think very hard to realize that that's a very Christian ethos. Death is conquered by leading the way out of this sort of nihilistic philosophy. And the power of the nihilistic philosophy contributes to that vision. It doesn't try to destroy it. It's been defeated. It realizes itself as shortcoming, and then it helps the better vision succeed. And this turns out to be a major plot point in the series. Like, this sets the masterminds of the show back a lot. Ends up being the reason why they don't succeed. And so, yeah, we could go into why Jiraiya has a moment on his death where he chooses not to give up and accept his death, and that leads to this being the way that the world takes. And then the book he wrote becomes the key to changing the world, right? Book, the text of the forefathers guiding us, also not very subtle, right? And then people are called back to life. And I mean, that's just miracle of miracles. And Nagato says the pain won't end now. Like, things will come after you now. War inflicts death, injury, and pain to both sides. The more precious someone is to you, the harder it is to accept that they might die. Yeah, it especially can't be helped with your generation, who don't know war, right? We don't, in any meaningful sense, know war, like the World War II vets do. But all there is pain and maybe we wouldn't be so eager to rush into a cultural civil war if we knew what it was, but I digress. All there is pain and unbearable hatred, wasteful death, eternal hatred, and pain that does not heal. Like, you think losing someone to cancer is hard? War is, well, it's been said it's hell, and I agree. That's what war is. And those are things you will face. It feels like someone set it all up, or perhaps this was the doing of an actual god. Like, something is pulling us from the monkey state that we were in, through city-states, through democracies, and through this vision of a hopeful future. And if you want to call that God, then, you're welcome to. But the point is that there's a tendency, a consequence of the human inborn ethic that leads us to this sort of path of coexistence and hope that Naruto espouses. And that's why I think it's Western values, Western theology that shines through this character. That's why he's so popular, and that's also why he's captured so well in the Japanese mythological lens. And so, yeah, he passes away. They part as friends. I pray that you will be the blossom of hope that never wilts. And she ends up fighting for Naruto in a very meaningful way afterwards. And then that's almost that. This would be a brilliant place to end this show. But the show has another arc to end. And many have said that this is the end of Naruto's arc, in a sense. Because he grew up ostracized, demonized, because he had this nine-tailed spirit in him. He grew up demonized and ostracized and alienated by society. And then he finally makes it back as the savior, right? He's transcended all the judgment and skepticism of his villagers. He hasn't turned to the dark paths of the school shooting or sort of antisocial behavior. He's chosen to strive for their acceptance and keep his light shining. And then he finally is acknowledged when he makes it back. Everyone's alive now. They're not just avenged, they're alive. They have their lives they can live. And he's sort of hailed, like this show started with Naruto sharing his relentless optimistic dream to one day become this leader of the village. And yeah, it just gets right at the transcendent themes of the narratives. And then everyone wants to celebrate him. And, when he was summoned with the toads that he had used to help defeat, that was also a great moment. And this is a callback. And all his friends are gathered, and they're all hailed as, right, it's just so good. It's so good writing. Because this is like 6 years of plot. There is a hero right before our eyes, and there's no words. You can say trite, you can say cliched, but there's no words for this. This is all the hero's journey. This is Campbell's hero's journey. The hero returns having changed, victorious on the field of battle, victorious in the field of ethics, and having chosen the right path. He's led the village towards the brighter future, and there's nothing that beats that. That's it. That's endgame right there. And then, politics and real life keeps the plot moving, but the point is essentially that in this moment, he is triumphant. And I think that those were some of the reasons why this is the most popular arc of the most popular anime. And people haven't put it into these words, and I don't know if I've gotten everything right, but I think that there's something there. I think that's why it's the most popular arc, and I think that's why it's the most popular show. And I might offer some ending reflections on the greater significance of these values colliding. I think it's possible that, as we saw in the 1960s with the psychedelic revolution and Hinduism and the inspiration that Eastern mythology played in Western mythology and the culture clash that they experienced, and the subsequent fall of the values that were commonplace in the 50s, to this social movement towards everyone being one, as is sort of like this ancient Buddhist Hindu truth, all is one. It's also a very Christian truth in the final sense, all is one with God. That the culture war that we see in the West is in part inspired by Western mythology meeting Eastern mythology. And that sounds strange, it sounds far-fetched, because it's like it's radical progressivism versus radical conservatism. And I'm not a scholarly expert on everything involving that, but it's my sense that the mythological, we're not talking philosophical, we're talking mythological underpinnings of these attractions could very well be a consequence of the Western ethos colliding with the Eastern ethos. And I don't know what that means, because it's such a... I'm at the limits of my intellectual capacity when I say that. It's just it's a musing I have. It's a thought, a theory that seems likely. So studying and understanding these Eastern works, and especially in the sense that they collide with Western values, I think it has a lot of I hope. Yeah, I've written here that Naruto Pain remembered the innocent, authentic vision of his youth strongly enough to entrust the future to Naruto. And this whole arc has essentially been a meditation on the role of peace and the cost of peace, and the sort of values that lead to peace. And they're not the totalitarian roots, where one tyrant protects everyone with infinite power. That's not how peace is achieved. Yeah. So I think I've said everything I wanted to say. Let me just triple check. And all the frog imagery, yeah. The symbolic destruction. Six bats. The samsara wheel eyes, the Buddhist interpretation. Yeah. The time to deliver pain to this world. He wants people to feel the pain that he has felt. Vengeance, right? So this was vengeance versus forgiveness. This was, in many ways, where one of the factions involved today wants to take things, and what values we should aspire to. It's a profoundly optimistic, and it might be naive, but here's the thing. If the values that we all really resonate to are naive, then maybe we are naive as a species. And maybe that's why we've been able to create things like, well, functional states, cooperation, teamwork, hope, dreams, caring, sharing. Maybe it's because we are naive. And in a fundamental sense, we're not dog eat dog. Like, there's actual empathy working in the world. Okay. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy this, and you're pretty good. I hope you have a great day. Take care.